Super Bowl just happened,
What a
and
game.
people are already trying to compare Brady to Mahomes, which I think is a little weird. I think they're skipping some steps. I think that if you want to say Patrick Mahomes is the most talented active quarterback, I think that's completely fine. I have no issue with that. I think he is better than every other quarterback in the league right now. No disrespect to Lamar Jackson, no disrespect to Josh Allen. I think he has the ability to do the most with the least when his surrounding cast is struggling. That being said, he's only got three Super Bowls, and only I know is kind of an eye roll, but he still hasn't tied Joe Montana. So I feel like, let's talk about Mahomes versus Montana or Mahomes versus some other people like Aikman has three, Mahomes versus some other people that are a little bit closer to his trophy count. I
Mm-hmm.
when you have three, you can legitimately be compared head to head with someone who has seven, especially if you lost both times you face him in the playoffs, fair or not. I think it's an unfair comparison to Mahomes. I think he's too early in his career to put all that on him. But I
Right.
think he's in shouting distance with Montana, right? So you can
Right. Yeah.
been to Super Bowls. He's 3-1 in Super Bowls. If he wins another one, he'll be 4 out of 5, 4-1. Um, I think if you want to start saying, hey, Mahomes is as good as Joe Montana at that point, because Montana had an amazing surrounding cast with Jerry
Right.
Rice, greatest wide receiver. There's a debate whether or not Kelsey is the greatest tight end ever. I favor Gronk over Kelsey just because Gronk actually blocked and would block defensive ends. Kelsey seems to be more of a large wide receiver type of tight end. But again, that's a preference thing. So
Right.
mine is enjoy what Mahomes is doing, but it's unfair to him to compare him to Brady when he's four down in terms of
Right.
ring. I think
Yeah.
I think it's Brady went to 10, won seven, right? Something like that, I think.
Was it six?
And won seven, I think.
Oh, he said, oh,
It was,
because you're counting Tampa Bay. I'm counting six in New England. Yeah.
right. So he won seven, lost three. So he's been to 10 Super Bowls. Okay.
Right.
Like that's I mean, Mahomes hasn't even been to five Super Bowls at this point.
Right.
So,
Right.
so we're he's great. It's kind of like when people tried to say LeBron was better than Jordan prematurely, right?
Yeah. That's a good analogy. I buy
I
that.
and you can say if you talk about pure physical ability, sure, okay, you can say Mahomes is more physically gifted than Brady, but so is Lamar Jackson, arguably, right? Like Lamar Jackson is a much better runner than Brady, and that, like, at what
Yeah.
point, right? Like, if you can't convert that into titles, what does it mean?
Right.
Nothing. I think there's
Hmm.
a fame for a reason, but if you're so much more talented than XYZ and you don't have the hardware to show for it, that's in a lot of ways even more of an indictment on whatever you've done with your career than if not, right? Like it's the whole thing that I've always said, I don't run around saying, oh, I'm more talented than this big name producer or that big name producer when they got, walls full of Grammys, right? It's like, well, if I'm that much greater, then I'm really underachieving and that's depressing. Like let's call it what it is. On some level, they have to be better at what I do in that arena. And that's okay, right? Like nobody's gonna be number one except for number one, right? It's
Right.
how with your opportunities, do you make the most of your surrounding cast? That sort of thing. Do you orient your life and your approach and your goals around making the most of your abilities or not. And nobody's saying that you have to, right? There's plenty of people who partied hard, like Jeremy Shockey, right? Like amazingly talented tight end when he came in the league. His priorities weren't necessarily to be the best tight end ever in terms of, work ethic, et cetera, et cetera. Like he liked to party. He liked to have threesomes
He was
with,
he was no Tony Gonzalez.
hey, nobody's saying that, you,
Right.
you know, McMahon, right? Like he was more of a party animal showing up,
Hmm.
hungover to the Super Bowl or
Yeah.
whatever.
Right.
So, you know, um, yeah. So my initial take is don't put Mahomes against Brady just yet. Celebrate what he is doing and
Hmm.
people in his weight class, right? That he can
Right.
actually that he's one Super Bowl more than or one Super Bowl less than,
Yeah.
but he's four Super Bowls less than. And yes, I get that it's 6 years in, right? I think he's 28, right? So this is 6 years in. If you look at the same time in their respective careers in terms of Brady and Mahomes, it is somewhat comparable in terms of Brady had won three Super Bowls in
Yeah.
his starting. Yes,
That's
but
what I was gonna say.
but but and there's
But
a
here's the but. What is it, man?
big but here, right? Um, that's still not seven. That's not even four. So is he on pace? Sure,
Yeah.
but what does pace mean? There's people who have won three and then never won anything again, like Aikman. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
thought
No,
Aikman.
that's fair. I don't disagree with anything you just said, man. I think it's in the nature of today's media environment and the internet, particularly online, right? The social media element of it too. Like people are always looking for headlines. So
Yeah,
I agree. It's too early to compare him. But I will say that the point you just made was my caveat, which is that I think it's completely reasonable to compare the first 6 years and make a statement like he's better than Brady was at the same point because he's got
better.
the same. I would say he's better because he does more. Because he like the first three Super Bowls, two or three Super Bowls, Brady was really like he was throwing short to mid range passes. He didn't have a gun, and a huge part of the offense was predicated on the run game. And then Belichick. Remember we talked about this the other day, like how the first half of his career was sort of Belichick's prime in the second. And so I just think like the difference between Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, as an example, right,
Mm-hmm.
is that he has the physical gifts, but he also has like the intuition and
Right.
the smarts, the what's it called?
The
He, he
clutch.
he's got the clutch gene. He's got the clutch gene, but he understands like how to play the game, like in a way that say predecessors like him were accused of maybe unfairly or not, but like somebody like Michael Vick or even before him, Randall Cunningham, right? Like the knock on the athletic quarterbacks back then was that they couldn't read an offense, and again, that's fair or not, but like there's no doubting that like somebody like Mahomes is far and away advanced at the age that he is. Like there was one point during that last drive where he could have thrown it downfield and he just went for the short dump pass to I forget who he passed it to and and that was like a really crucial part. So he just I think it's fair. It's more fair to try and make a comparison and evaluation about the first three Super Bowls versus that same era than it is to your point to try and compare the whole thing because Brady is still the greatest quarterback of all
So
time. So I agree with that part.
so yeah, and to build off of that, remember that at one point, Tiger Woods is on pace to beat
Oh my
Jack Nicklaus,
gosh. Absolutely. What is it? 18?
right?
Is
But
18?
it never happened, right?
Well, it don't say he's at 17, right?
It hasn't happened, is my point. Like, in other words, we all expected Tiger to beat Nicklaus's record by now, right? For
Yeah, we
how
did.
he took the PGA by storm before all of the weirdness with Live and everything else. Um, we fully expected for Tiger to have 18 majors by now. And that's my cautionary point with Mahomes. Yes, he's amazing. If you want to say he's the Tiger Woods of quarterbacking, I'm even fine with that analogy. The challenge is, yes, he has the tools to beat Nicholas, but a lot of things can go wrong. Like I Patriots fans will always cringe and remember 2007 and 2012, just like I'm sure um, Chiefs fans remember Mahomes kind of getting undressed against the Buccaneers versus Brady, right? So there's going to be times where everything seems lined up for him to win it all, and he's just not going to. So we'll just have
Right.
to see how many of those,
I just looked it up. It's actually 18 to 15.
right?
Yeah.
And so that again, that's my point. Is it's
Yeah.
really right now to be a prisoner of the moment and say, all right, well, he's been to four already. He's 3-1. You know, he's only 28. If he plays 12 more years by this, yeah, sure. How long does Kelsey have? How long does Andy Reid have? You know, how long can they keep some of their higher end stars like Chris Jones, et cetera, in the fold without going over salary cap? Like, how well are they going to draft? These are all things that, you
Yeah.
know, Patriots had to deal with. That's the reason there was two batches of three titles and not a title year after year after year. Now, some of that had to do with, um, look, Spagnolo, who they do have on their side, is an amazing defensive coordinator, right? If you look at all of the um, defenses that he's coordinated in Super Bowls, they generally performed well and outperformed what the expectation was. Like he definitely held down the Patriots in the 2007 Super Bowl when they had the chance to go 19-0. He clearly did a few things that frustrated the 49ers here. You know, how long is Spagnolo going to be the defensive coordinator? Is he going to get another shot at head coach? And then because he gets another shot, the Chiefs start to get the brain drain that the Patriots experienced, right?
Yeah.
Like second round of Super Bowls, you know, they lost McDaniels, they lost a couple other people. So I'm saying all that to say, yes, Mahomes is super talented. I just think people need to pump the brakes on saying
I agree.
he's
Yeah.
or can compete because a lot of things, as someone who proudly watched a 20-year dynasty, you know, we there was a time where we expected to be in the Super Bowl every year,
Yep.
and you know, we got there 9 times, um, you know, but we only won six. So I say that to say, let's just pump the brakes a little. We can acknowledge his greatness, celebrate his greatness without putting undue pressure, unrealistic pressure, similar to how we thought Tiger Woods was going to crush Nicholas's record. And to this day, it hasn't happened. So that's all I got for
We're
that.
gonna we're gonna have to manufacture some controversy. I mean, I agree with everything you said. My only thing was I do think it's somewhat fair to compare the early parts of it. And for my money,
Yeah.
Mahomes is the better quarterback at this point. And we could argue about how much better, um but I agree, man. It's way too early. I don't think it's too early to talk about LeBron and MJ. Um, but yeah, man.
I can't go that far. I can't say Mahomes is a better quarterback. I the most I can give you is he has more, but that
He
again,
has more
that
what?
he has more physical gifts, meaning he can run faster.
Yeah, and throw further and harder.
but I don't necessarily think that that's everything. You get what I'm saying? Because you still have to be able to read a defense. You still have to be able to avoid picks. You still have to be able to
Mm-hmm.
move with your eyes. Those are all things
With
still
all things he does well.
you still have to be able to manage a pocket. And when you oh, because keep in mind that, and part of this is because Brady got the ACL in 2008. When you keep in mind what you're allowed to do to a quarterback now versus what you were allowed to do during the first dynasty, I'm talking about up until 2007. We know in 2008, after Kansas City blew out Brady's ACL, that they did come up with a new rule that you can't hit a quarterback low while he's in his throwing motion or something like that, right? Like they definitely started. And it wasn't just him. I think also Carson Palmer, if I remember correctly, there's a play where Chemo Van Alhoffen just kept rolling
Yeah,
around.
yeah. Carson Palmer. Wow. USC.
So it wasn't only Brady, but because it was enacted after the Brady one, everybody calls it the Brady rule, right? So from 2000 to 2007, when that wasn't in place, and you could hit the quarterbacks a little bit harder, and you could hit the quarterbacks a little bit late, I think that Brady's ability to manage the pocket, stay in, throw, do subtle movements to avoid pressure was on par with Mahomes. I think Brady could manage the pocket as well as Mahomes in his early days. Maybe not that very first 2001 Super Bowl because he was a brand new starter, but by
Right.
2004, I think he was a great game manager. And the other argument that we really got to concede, man, is when you look at who Brady was throwing to compared to who Mahomes was throwing to, bro. Sorry. Like, all due respect to Troy Brown, Patriots Hall of Famer, Patriots Hall of Fame, and he's
Don't you do it, non. Don't you dare besmirch Troy
not,
Brown.
not in the same zip code as Tyreek Hill.
Now,
And
now, next thing you're going to start talking smack about Willie McGinnis. How dare you? How dare you, good sir?
hey, I love Troy Brown, one of my favorite Patriots. Not on Brady though.
Oh, yeah,
Like
yeah, my bad. Go ahead.
the tight ends that he had relative to Kelsey, right?
Yep.
So think he had Jermaine Wiggins, right? I'm talking about the first batch, not Gronk, not the Gronk days. He had Jermaine Wiggins, who Christian Fourier,
Oh, man, you are a Pats. You know the names. Like, I
uh,
haven't heard these names in years.
Daniel Graham, okay, Ben Watson, okay. None of those four are approaching the talent level of Kelsey. Okay, sorry. And if you want to talk about wide receivers, you had, other than Troy Brown, you had David Patton, right? Then later on, you had David Givens. It wasn't until you got Deion Branch and he got that MVP and he really started balling out. And that was what, 03? That you had something approaching, but it still wasn't on the level of Tyreek Hill and it still wasn't on the level of Kelsey. So 2001, he basically was throwing to what other people would call journeymen. I look, like, let's be honest. No, none of his skill position players from that first era will make the Hall of Fame. Full stop.
Troy
None
Brown? Troy
of
Brown won't be Hall of Fame?
the players from 2001 to 2004 will make the Hall of Fame.
Really?
Stop me when I lie. Name one. Name one that he played with that's gonna make the Hall of Fame. We both think Tyreek Hill will make the Hall of Fame. Yes. We both think Travis Kelsey will make the Hall of Fame. Yes. So who was Brady
Well,
third?
Wes Welker in that group in that first
Oh,
batch?
2007. So
Mm.
if you really want to compare the eras, you also have to concede that Brady's skill position players were weaker than Mahomes. Now, if you want to say their defenses were on par, that's fine,
Right.
right? Or if you want to say he had a little bit better defense, I'll even accept that. Although I think this year the Chiefs do have a star-studded defense. I think they had a few Pro Bowlers, right? You
Yeah,
got Chris.
they had a really good defense.
The
Well, okay, now I'm just this is the counter, right?
because
Bel
you have Brown and Cass,
Brady had Belichick. Is,
and
is is Andy Reid right? Is
you think
Andy Reid a better coach in his first Super Bowl season than Belichick was in that season? I don't
you,
think so.
you think Andy Reid is a trash coach?
No, he's not a trash coach. He's a great coach. But
So
I
what? Okay, so here's what I would say. I think Andy Reid on offense is what Belichick is to defense, and here's why I say that, right?
Mhm.
Um, because you have to look at the two Andy Reid eras, right? There was the Philly era where he had Donovan McNabb, right? And they went to the NFC Championship pretty much every year. Uh, they won it once and then they lost against us, right? In '04, I think. Yeah, '04. But they were in the NFC Championship every year with Donovan McNabb. Um, the only wide receiver they had that was like, wow, was Terrell Owens, I think, in that era, right? Or am I
Yeah.
correct? Because I think Deshaun was later, right?
Yeah.
Right. So yeah. So I would say you had Andy Reid still trying to do what Belichick eventually undid himself with, which was he tried to coach and GM. He wanted final say on the draft and the roster, but he also wanted to coach. So that was what undid him in Philly. He realized going to Kansas City that he couldn't handle both. He says, "Yo, Dorsey, take care of this for me and let me just be great with the coaching and the in-game management." And I think that was what freed Andy Reid, along with having Mahomes, to be all that he could be. But I would say that Andy Reid on offense is just as smart, accomplished, whatever you want to call it, as Belichick was on defense. When you look at the times that they matched up, typically what would happen was Belichick, if it was like a game where it's close, with the exception of one game, Belichick would usually shut the Chiefs out early. Like the first half, Chiefs would struggle to move the ball, and then the second half would be an offensive flurry. And if you look at Belichick, a lot of times what people give him credit for is the halftime adjustments, and I think Reid is very similar. Reid is like, all right, they're defending us that way. Here's what we're going to do now. This is the whole game
Right.
plan. So I say that to say you can argue that Belichick is a better coach than Andy Reid, but I think it's maybe by 20%, 25%. I don't think it's this curb stomping. I think, Andy Reid just needed what Belichick had. Like Andy Reid needed a generational quarterback to go along with his ability. I think the only people that you think about that have won multiple Super Bowls without a generational quarterback, guys like Joe Gibbs, right? Like he won Super Bowl 3 times with 3 different quarterbacks, right? None of them. All due respect to the great Doug Williams, not everybody is arguing for him or Mark Rippon to be in the Hall of Fame, right?
Yep. Yep.
So, and believe me, I am super proud of everything that Doug Williams did. If you ask me, at least his performance, and they sat him way too early, but his performance, that singular game belongs in the Hall of Fame, and I think it is in the Hall of Fame, and at least it's in the Black Hall of Fame. I know in my house,
Yeah. Totally. I mean, I
um,
remember that game well as well. Yeah.
that was my one caveat. We can move on from football, but I did want to talk about that real quick.
I mean, you make good points as usual. I think the last 5 years, obviously, I think Reid has been the superior coach. I was making the comparison more the first three Super Bowls. I think
Yeah,
that's where I think Belichick was probably, but I don't the last two that he's won, I mean, maybe just the first Super Bowl, where I think there's a substantial difference, if there is one.
the other debate is did Shanahan choke both times, which is an interesting.
Yeah.
I go ahead.
That was actually what I was going to ask you about. The two plays that stood out to me, just sort of in hindsight, was the one where Bosa, where they had the third and one, right? Or was it fourth and one? They got to the fourth and one, right? No, I forget what it. I can't remember if it was third and one or fourth and one, but they got that Bosa bit
Timeout.
on the fake. That was like a big thing. To me, that's like a failure, not just of Bosa, but of the
Yeah,
defensive coach to say like, "Hey, man, he's gonna run it." He did it like you got beat on this like a few plays ago. He's gonna run it. And then the other play was the one where they couldn't score, where the Niners didn't score.
yeah. I think there's a couple of things in play that you can criticize the 49ers on in terms of coaching decisions. Um, I do think that early on they had a good game plan. Obviously, they went up 10-0. I think the defense was playing. I think my criticism is I don't think they should have gone to zone, and I don't think they should have done a cover zero blitz when they did.
Yep.
Um, feel like Mahomes is somebody that can make you pay if you blitz and you don't get home because of his motor. It's similar to why when Belichick plays Josh Allen or played Josh Allen, we don't know if Belichick's ever coming back to the league. Um, wouldn't full out blitz him, uh, generally speaking, because mobile quarterbacks, if they beat one or two rushers, they're usually gone, or they usually buy themselves enough time that somebody is single coverage down the field. And if your corners can't plaster technique, like meaning the quarterback is running, and regardless of what route they were running, now all the wide receivers are doing sight adjustments to try to give the quarterback somewhere to throw the ball. And as a corner, you just have to stay on that person. That's why they kind of call it plaster. Like you're supposed to kind of plaster yourself on them, cover them like plaster, right? Um, if you don't have a secondary that can do that well, like if you don't have the Revis type, the shutdown corner that watches hips, super instinctual, or the guy that has the massive closing speed, right? I think you think of like Jalen Ramsey in his prime, or some other guys. Aeneas Williams is one of them, right? Just super fast. Deion Sanders is another one where even if he's out of position, that closing speed, when he sees that ball come out, he can still make it there and break it up or intercept it, or make a play on the football. If you don't have that, I don't think that you go cover zero blitz
Yeah.
against a mobile quarterback. He makes you pay. Um, the criticism, the two big criticisms I saw from a coaching standpoint. Number one, I think it was 3rd and 4 before the 2-minute warning. They could have forced the Chiefs to take a timeout, and they chose to pass the ball and they didn't complete it. That's one where potentially you do a max block, um, maybe some kind of motion just to free up the middle and hand it to McCaffrey and see what McCaffrey can do. Whether you want to do that with Juszczyk as a fullback, trying to clean out some of the dirt and have McCaffrey on his hip, or you want to scheme it up so that it looks like a fake reverse. Whatever you want to do, but do something where you give McCaffrey a chance. That way, you're forcing the timeout. Number one, and then number two, obviously, if you convert, then it's 30, 40 more seconds you can run off the clock. That's number one. Number two, the criticism that I've seen is, yes, the San Francisco defense was tired, but um, taking the ball first,
Yeah, that one too. Yep.
pretty right. There's a reason in college that when they win the toss, they give the other team the ball first, so they know, hey, do I have to match a field goal or do I have to match a touchdown? And so I say that to say I think some of the criticisms are fair. I think they could have run the ball more. I think there were times that they got too pass happy. I do get that the Chiefs were heavily playing the run and they were running a lot of run blitzes, but I also know that somebody as creative as Shanahan can scheme certain things up even against a run blitz where you fake a run to the middle, pitch to the outside,
Right.
you know, there's some screens and draws. There's some different things that you can do, in terms of mixing up the protections and mixing up the calls and who's going to pull, to try to, um, frustrate that. But I do think them calling a play action against a blitz, um, that one time was a fail too. I think on third and whatever, if it's not 3rd and 2, I'm not a fan of trying to run play action. I know that they were playing the run heavy, but on third down in that situation, you have to expect blitz, and you have to, I think, either have a run play that's set up to beat the blitz or have a screen,
Yeah,
uh, set up to beat the blitz. And so you can kind of nitpick. I don't think they coached a horrible game, but I do think situationally, both Steve Wilks on defense, it looked like there's one timeout where Shanahan basically said, "Hey man, Wilks, you can't blitz Patrick Mahomes. This is Patrick Mahomes. This isn't." It's kind of like, this is what I will give Patrick Mahomes. It's like Brady. After a while, you couldn't really blitz Brady because he knew where the hot read was.
yeah,
He
yeah.
throw. He knew how to look off the coverage, et cetera, et cetera. And he
Right.
also knew how to do sight adjustment. There were plays. I think Gronk said in the interview he had about 6 touchdowns where it's basically he kept the same play on, but then communicated to Gronk, you run this particular route. Everybody else will run the routes they're supposed to, but you need to run this route because I recognize this on the defense when we
Right.
did the most.
Yeah, I mean, he really is like him and LeBron have that similar trait to their ability, to read defenses and make in-game adjustments like that. The
Yeah.
weird thing, the weird thing about
Go ahead.
the weird thing about Shanahan, about them electing to to take the ball first, was after the game. I correct me if I'm wrong, but Shanahan and other players were basically admitted like they were unfamiliar with the overtime rules or something. I don't know if it was Shanahan or did you see that? But like they basically like just pull it up on ESPN. They said like, yeah, we didn't really understand the rules.
I,
That to me,
right? This
what's
was a
that?
whole after the Buffalo Bills choked with 13 seconds to go and lost in overtime, right? They petitioned that in the playoffs, both teams should be allowed to possess the ball regardless of whether or not the first team got the touchdown. But I think what wasn't clear there was, do you just keep playing for the full 15 minutes? Or is the argument, if one team gets a field goal and the other team gets a touchdown, the game is over? I think that was the issue that wasn't clear. I don't think that, everybody was, even some of the commentators were like asking, I wouldn't have known conclusively unless they had put the rules up on the TV. Um, and I even was listening to a Patriots podcast where some of the guys weren't familiar with the rules, like they were arguing with what the rules were. So
Right,
I think it's a relatively new development because number one, doesn't apply to regular season at all. The regular season rules are still the regular season rules.
right,
And first time since the Bills whined about it and got the rule change that these, rules were in place. So I think it was new for everybody. And, there's only one other Super Bowl that went into overtime, as we know. That was the 28-3 game where Shanahan was the offensive coach, not the coordinator, and he got a little pass happy in terms of some people's opinions, given what the lead was. I'm fine with it because obviously it worked out okay for the Patriots. But yeah,
right,
so I think in that scenario, if the Patriots Falcons game had been played, because the Patriots got the touchdown, they would have had to kick the field goal in the under the new rules, and then the Falcons would have had to score a touchdown
right.
on immediate possession in order to keep the game going. And if they weren't able to score a touchdown, the game would be over. But I think
Yeah,
that's
that's the regular season version. Yeah. I
so.
mean, I'm reading it here. After the game, Shanahan said his discussion with team's analytics staff had indicated it would be best to take the ball first because if both teams matched scores on their opening drives, the Niners would get the ball to open the portion of overtime in which, okay, so yeah, you both, but that to me sounds like they were overthinking it and that they sort of understood what was at stake.
I think that's the struggle with analytics, right? It's kind of like the whole Dan Campbell thing in Detroit, right? You remember how Detroit had a chance to kick the field goal to go up 3 scores, but I guess the analytics told them they should go for it, and they ended up not getting it, right? It's one of those things where I think you have to balance what the pure analytics say with what they say situationally, because I look at it like there's a marriage between statistical probability, but also, momentum, emotion, psychological advantage, right? So uh, if you're playing Peyton Manning in the playoffs, right? If you look at the reason that Seattle dismantled his Broncos team so bad when they came in with the number one offense was essentially Peyton Manning is a front runner. If the game is close or he feels like he's still in the game, he'll eventually put together some drives and he'll cut you up. But if he starts to feel like the game is out of reach, he starts to pout, he starts to mope, he starts to get disinterested. And you basically saw that by halftime, even though the score wasn't egregious yet, it wasn't already 43-8. He had basically quit, and it was Wes Welker who was trying to rally the offense, right? So if you're playing a Peyton Manning type, then the psychological advantage to me is stay up 3 scores because he's going to pout, he's going to mope, he's going to start to let that self doubt creep in. I don't care what my analytics guy is saying. I'm kicking that field goal if it means I stay up 3 scores because I know Peyton Manning is going to mope because that was just how he rolled. He generally was not the king of massive comebacks when it came to the playoffs, right? If you
Right.
got up, he would tank. Like that's why we were beating him like 20-3 in
Right.
Fox, right?
Right.
So that's the one thing that I think is getting lost. I think analytics has a place in the game in terms of all right, they're likely to do this, we're likely to do that, this is likely to do this, but then you also have to pull back and look at the big picture, right? Like I think one of the most underrated things that Belichick did, regardless of what the analytics were, the analytics probably said, Bill, all the time out. We need to preserve time against Seattle. But he looked like Seattle was expecting them to call the timeout so they didn't have to. And he's like, I'm not going to bail them out. I'm looking over there and they don't know what they're doing. They see that we're now goal line 3 corners and they're trying to adjust to that.
Yeah.
Um, and so the interception happened.
Is that confirmed that Belichick was doing that, or is that a con? I remember seeing something about that, but
So
I'm
if you watch, I think it's Do Your Job 1, right? Because I think that was 49, right? So it's Do Your Job number 1. What happened was Matt Patricia at the time, remember Pat Patricia, was a defensive coordinator, and he ran up on Belichick like, "Hey, do you want to call the timeout here?" And Belichick was kind of quiet; he didn't respond. And then Matt Patricia said again, like, normally we'd call a timeout here. Bills was like, I'm looking over there. There's something going on over there. They don't seem organized. I got it. We're not going to call a timeout. So it was a conscious decision by Bill Belichick looking
yeah,
over Seattle because I think he was thinking after the run, Seattle expected them to call the timeout. When he didn't do it, they were scrambling because they only had one timeout left and they couldn't burn the timeout that early when they had already run it on first down because his throw was on second down. And now, because they're having to think on the fly, you can actually watch this on YouTube because Pete Carroll kind of sat with Richard Sherman and said, "Hey, look, this is what it was. We only had one timeout left, and I knew if we ran right there, we would have to throw 2 more times if we didn't get it in. So I figured throw on second down because they had called the goal line 3 corners. So, other than the 3 corners, that's 8, combo D linemen, linebackers that are stacking in the box with the designs on stopping Marshawn Lynch from getting in the end zone. And they had, if I remember correctly, scored 5 or 6 touchdowns off of that exact play. So that was why Carroll felt comfortable calling it there, given the timeout situation that there was only one, and knowing that the minute that he ran, he would have to use that timeout in order to preserve two more downs. So that's the game within the game, the chess versus checkers, whatever you want to call it. That I think gets lost in analytics, right? Like I think your analytics guy is just going to say, "Hey, here you're supposed to call the timeout because otherwise we only have 30 seconds left, and then our win odds go this." And Belcher was like, "Yeah, no, but I think they're about to make a mistake here because scrambling." So
Yeah, I mean that was massive. I've seen the docu or the mini documentary on that moment, and I remember what you were saying. I just couldn't remember specifically, but yeah, I do now that you're saying it out loud, and I think, I mean, obviously hindsight is 2020. I mean, that was one of the greatest. The reaction Brady, the I've seen some videos of Brady on the sideline where he's just like, and then like the joy and the elation that he when he sees that interception, man, it's crazy, man.
now
I was a Pats fan when that happened, man.
here's
That
a fun
Richard Sherman.
Malcolm Butler interception. Top three Super Bowl play of all time has to be right.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Because I've asked people that. Some people say it's number one. I don't know if I'd go that far, but it it definitely belongs in the top three. I don't think it goes lower than three because there have been, Santonio Holmes tiptoe catch against Arizona, and also the pick six that he ran 100 yards. James Harrison ran off of Kurt Warner right before halftime to flip the game around. That was
Oh,
amazing.
the
Uh,
Tyree helmet catch.
uh, uh, reason that's not my top three is it was not a scoring play and it didn't clinch the game.
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, we didn't even talk about the greatest quarterback of all time, Eli Manning, right? I mean, technically, he's 2-0 against Brady in the Super Bowls, man. So, I mean, if A square plus B square equals C square, then A square equals C square. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, here's my
Don't
one.
respond seriously to my joke, man. Please don't insult my.
No. Here's what I was gonna say about the two Giant Super Bowls. I thought the Giants were more talented than the Patriots in 2012, and keep in mind that Gronk basically had one foot out there. I think it was 2000. It was a 2012 Super Bowl, right? He's 2011 or 2012. Like I that season.
The Tyree catch was like
That was
this.
2000,
Yeah, that
2008.
was 2007.
2008 was a Super
They were
Bowl.
they were not better than. What's your take on that? They had the best record in the league. They were undefeated.
That one, I felt like they underperformed. I felt like they were just outplayed. I felt like the offensive line did not come to play. I think the offensive line, and I mean, Logan Mankins is considered arguably a Hall of Fame guard. He did not have a good game. I don't think anybody on that offensive line had a good game. They were getting pressure with four, which generally means your offensive line is underperforming. The only, and this is not an excuse, I think if Sammy Morris had not been hurt with the chest injury, I think he was a better fit for what the run game needed to be in that Super Bowl, given how the Giants were playing. Instead, we had Lawrence Maroney, who was a little more of a shifty zone kind of. He wasn't like a power back like the Antoine Smith or the Corey Dillon, clock killing Corey Dillon days, right? I think if
Chris
Sam,
Fua Mata Maafala
go ahead.
or Chris Fua Mata Maafala.
Um,
Remember this
so
little brother from UH? He was on
no,
the Pats for a little bit.
not ringing a bell, man. I'm sorry. But yeah, I think if Sammy Morris had been healthy, uh, it might have been a little more competitive because Sammy Morris was more of the between the tackles back, wear down the defense, get the D line tired of trying to wrap him up. Similar to how LeGarrette Blount was in the later years, right? He was like a bigger back that safeties and corners didn't want to tackle, and D linemen and line of tackling. right? So
I lied. I thought this kid played for the Pats, but he never played for him. That's why you didn't remember him.
I think he was a chief or something. But
It's the Steelers and the Jaguars.
got you. Yeah, so that's my one thing on that. I think honestly in 2000, the 2011-12 Super Bowl, Belichick choked at the worst possible time. And this is what I mean. Yes, Brady got the safety, which was bad. But my one, well, no, I had two fundamental disagreements with what Belichick did. Number one, I would not have challenged the Mario Manningham catch by the sideline, right? So he challenged that and he lost a timeout. Had he not used that challenge, he would have had three timeouts to essentially hold them to a field goal um, instead of allowing them to score and then trying to tie it up in that 2011 2012. So that is my biggest criticism of Belichick in that game. I felt like he made the wrong challenge. It was clearly a catch. You could see from the replay it was a catch. It was like a hopeful challenge rather than a challenge based off of likelihood of overturn, which generally you don't see him do. Generally, he'll keep it in the pocket unless it's
Right.
turn. And so that is my one critique. I think that even though the Giants had more talent in the second matchup, it was Belichick misusing his timeouts and challenges that ultimately doomed the Patriots.
Um, Let me ask you this before we hang up. Does knowing Brady's level of competitiveness, just how,
Uh-huh.
famously competitive this guy is, right? That
Mhm.
him and Jordan are neck and neck for that sort of title, right?
Yes, except he didn't punch teammates in the face for
He
screwing up,
didn't punch, but I mean, he
but he
he,
cursed them.
he
He cursed
cursed
them.
them out. Yeah.
Yeah, he was like
Knowing
that.
all that, does Eli Manning still, to some degree, live rent free in his head right now? Because what does it feel like to know that you're that like on paper you're the better quarterback, but in those two moments where it counted, this guy that doesn't take it as seriously, right? That's not as committed as you are,
Right.
basically like a ostensibly like a party boy quarterback to a degree, right? That's a fair characterization of Eli Manning, right? Um, what
Here's
like I feel like if that was me and I was Brady, like I would still occasionally wake up and just be like, I can't believe we lost those two Super Bowls.
so those are two different discussions. Does he regret those losing those two Super Bowls in the Philly one? Yeah, he'll tell you that all day. He'll tell you that all three Super Bowls he lost haunt him. But does Eli live rent free in his head? No, because he won seven. His goal was to beat Jordan. He said that early on because people were like, yo, you got three. Yo, you got four. Yo, you tied Montana. He's like, the goal is not to tie Montana or beat Montana. The goal is to beat Jordan. He said that at around four titles. Okay. So he got his seven. So he's good. He accomplished his goal. He got seven, and seven is greater than two.
Fair enough. There you have
Seven
it.
multiple times greater than two. So he beat Jordan in a sport where it's supposed to be impossible to beat Jordan title wise. You get what I'm saying?
Well, no, that's not true because Bill Russell has eight. No,
No,
Bill Russell
sport.
has 10. Bill Russell has 10.
I said in a sport where it's impossible to beat Jordan, meaning football. It is
Oh,
impossible.
yeah, yeah. All right.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like to get seven titles, who you we can't name a player that has seven titles. Another player that we can't name a player that has six titles, can we? I think there might be one. Might be one. I
No,
think the one dude who played for the 49ers and the Cowboys, I forgot his name,
that doesn't count.
something enter whatever. He's like a D lineman, but that's it. The pre-save came through. I'm gonna forward it to you.
Man, all right. Our first football episode. That was fun, man.
I think so. I think there's some good content in there. I think we'd have to post it pretty soon, but yeah, it's got some good content in there.
Yeah, I'll move this to the front of the editing queue.
Uh,
Um,
yeah, I think it's
what a great game that was, man. I mean, it wasn't as good as the Atlanta game or the Seattle Pats game, but it was good.
yeah. I mean, you could argue to me, every Patriots Super Bowl was a one score game, right? Like that's the wild thing.
The
So
Atlanta game to me is the greatest Super Bowl of all time because of the nature of the odds, the way to me it's just like that. I've never seen anything like that in my life.
so you like that one more than the Seattle one?
Yes.
Okay. Now, here's what I will say. I know people who quit on the game. I was not one of those people who quit on the game for 28-3. But I will concede this. When it got to 28-3, I remember distinctly I got up from the living room. I closed my master bedroom door. I went into the bathroom. I closed my master bathroom door. And I let out this scream of just pure frustration, rage, whatever you want to call it, like a loud one. I am sure the neighbors heard me. And then once I got that all out, I opened the doors. I was sat back down. I was like, look, as long as they're playing, I'm watching. They might pull it off again.
It was
Let me
cr-
care.
that
And
was
then
that was
and
insane.
then that started. And then people were like, people were first hitting me with condolences, and then they were hitting me like, wait a minute, there's still life. And then people were hitting me with, no way, this can't happen. No way. If they win, then the NFL is rigged. And it's like, okay, you know what I mean? But yeah, great game.
Yeah. Well, it was a transcendent game because it's one of those games for me as a sports fan where
Yeah.
it gives you that feeling of like connected, like it was just that other, like it was so crazy, man. That game was those kinds of games are special, and they're spiritual if you really think of as a sports fan,
Mm.
because they when they're done, you're like, you think about all the hours of preparation,
Yeah.
heart that it takes to pull something like that off.
Oh yeah. They,
And so
well,
for me,
they,
that's just how I felt at the time, and still do.
yeah, they said that they conditioned maniacally for that game. Um, they said that Belichick had them running extra sprints. And they're like, why are we conditioning on Super Bowl week? And it turned out that that's what they needed. So that was back when Belichick was still on top of his game and kind of not checked out. The last thing that I will say is I always felt like that was the defining game that you could point to show why Brady was different than Manning. And what I mean by that, when I say that, is when you look at where Peyton was similarly score wise in that game where Seattle ended up winning 43-8, um, basically Peyton had quit by halftime, right? Like you can run that game back. You can look at his body language. You can look at all the interactions. You can break that. Most people don't want to because it's a 43-8 game. But whereas Brady never really gave up, you know what I mean? And he was always like, nah, we're going to. And there are multiple people on that, like Duron Harmon and Edelman, like, hey, this is going to be a great story. Like they never 100%, man to man. Like there were still people who felt like, look, we can still win this game. Like that to me is a
Yeah.
defining terms of heart, player leadership, not giving up. Dante Hightower basically said he had a come to Jesus moment where he said, "Look, my kids are going to watch this game, and when they watch this game, I don't want them seeing a parent who quit." Right, and then he goes out and gets that strip sack off of Matt Ryan, and so uh,
Yeah, yeah,
and that's why I say, look, if you want to talk about greatest regular season quarterback being Peyton Manning, cool, that's fine. But if you want to talk about just greatest quarterback in all time in context where
yeah,
titles, arts matter, not quitting as a rule when things get tough, uh, I think Brady's the guy, head and shoulders above Manning, and not just because of the seven versus two titles, but also if that had been Peyton Manning down 28-3, we know what would happen because we have 43-8. when he came in with the most prolific offense heretofore seen in that game. Like
Yeah.
you had a talented offense and you put up 8 points, that tells me you quit. I'm sorry. And I don't care what Peyton Manning apologists want to say. I have very little respect for the Manning family anyway. So
Oh, really? I with that maybe that's for another night.
yeah, it's because of some of the racist stuff they said. Like when Peyton Manning was sexually harassing the trainer in Tennessee and they got accused of it. Basically, Archie Manning sent an email saying, "Well, she dates black guys, so how much of a good girl can she be?" Yeah, I don't have any
I
respect for
don't.
them.
You know what? I didn't even follow that. Well, fuck him then.
Manning threw
Um,
under the bus for his PEDs. Oh yeah, they're for my wife. The HGH is for my wife. Yeah, because we know a whole lot of women that pound HGH. Yeah, okay, sure,
right.
buddy.
Oh, that's too bad. His commercials are so funny. Um,
Oh, do you remember the cut that meat game when we beat Peyton Manning 20-3 and the whole Patriots crowd started saying, "Cut that meat, cut, cut that meat." It was yeah, we hate Peyton over here. I don't care. I don't care what he's selling. I don't care how folksy he's trying to be. Screw him. Screw his daddy.
the um, the roast of Peyton Manning. I think it was. I can't remember the comedian's name. It's a
Mm.
female comic, and she said she's like Peyton Manning, like you're like the Tom Brady of commercials. Uh, meaning like he's great at commercials, but not football. Um, all right,
I like.
man. I will talk to you later, bro. Have a good rest of the week. We'll
Yeah,
catch
you. I'll forward you the pre-save link, and then once we got the promo video, I'll shoot that to you too.
All right, cool, man. Appreciate you, man. Have a good night.
All right, you too, man.
Peace. Title model. Did you like that? I bet you did. Subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Facebook too. Yeah, and listen to the music on Spotify and all that, okay? And if you don't, I'm just playing around. No, but seriously, do all those things that I just said. You know what I mean? Yeah, yeah.